My name is Evelyn, and I spend my days surrounded by ghosts. Not the rattling chains kind, but the kind that cling to the velvet lining of a 1920s jewelry box or the chipped paint of a Victorian vanity. I'm an appraiser and cataloger for Big AL's Southern auctions in a humid, moss-draped corner of Georgia. My job is to be invisible. I sit in the back of drafty warehouses or cramped attics, documenting the lives people leave behind when they pass away or go broke. I can tell you the difference between a genuine Chippendale chair and a clever reproduction from across the room, but if you ask me for the time, I'll probably stutter and look at my shoes. Shyness isn't just a trait for me, it's a physical weight. It's like living behind a thick pane of glass. I can see the world clearly, but my voice never quite makes it to the other side. In a town like Savannah, where everyone has a story and everyone talks a mile a minute, being the quiet girl makes you easy to overlook. And for a long time, I liked it that way. Being overlooked meant being safe. My boss, Big Al, is the exact opposite of me. He's a man made of loud polyester suits and a voice that sounds like gravel in a blender. He's a classic Southern auctioneer, fast-talking, charismatic, and occasionally leaning on the wrong side of honest. He calls me Mouse. As in, hey Mouse, get that inventory list ready for the Miller estate, or Mouse, don't just stand there, move those crates. He doesn't value my expertise. He values the fact that I don't argue when he takes credit for my finds. The trouble started with the Beaumont Manor. It was one of those legendary, crumbling estates on the edge of town, overgrown with wisteria and secrets. The Beaumonts had been local royalty for a century, but the last of the line had died without a clear heir, and the house was headed for the auction block. It was the biggest contract in Big AL's career. While Al was busy charm offensive ing the city council, I was sent into the house to catalog the contents. It was a tomb. Dust motes danced in the light of the tall, stained glass windows, and the air smelled of old paper and dried lavender. As I moved through the library, my hands trembling slightly as they always did when I touched something truly old, I found it. It wasn't a gold bar or a hidden diamond. It was a series of journals tucked behind a false panel in a heavy mahogany desk. These weren't just diaries, they were detailed records of the town's land deeds from the post-Civil War era. As I read through them, my heart began to race. These documents proved that a large portion of the land the city wanted to sell to a massive shopping mall developer didn't actually belong to the city, it belonged to a local community trust dedicated to low-income housing. If Big Al sold the house and these papers disappeared, the developer would tear down a historic neighborhood and displace dozens of families. But if I spoke up, I'd have to confront Al, the city council, and the lawyers. I'd have to stand in the spotlight. I looked at the journals, then at my own reflection in a dusty mirror. I saw a woman who looked like she wanted to disappear. "You can't do this, Evelyn," I whispered to myself. "You're just the mouse." But then I thought about the families in that neighborhood. I thought about the history that was about to be erased by a bulldozer. For the first time in my life, the silence felt less like a sanctuary and more like a betrayal. I tucked the journals into my bag, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The glass pane was still there, but I was starting to see a crack. The next few days were a blur of internal panic. Every time I heard Big AL's heavy footsteps approaching my workstation, I felt like I was going to faint. I kept the Beaumont journals hidden at the bottom of my bag, beneath my lunch and a stack of inventory sheets. They felt like they were vibrating, emitting a heat that only I could feel. "Mouse, where's the Beaumont catalog?" Al bellowed, slamming a hand onto my desk. He smelled like cheap cigars and peppermint. "I am almost finished, Al," I stammered, my voice barely audible over the hum of the warehouse fans. "There's a lot of intricate details. The library alone is." "Forget the library. Just list the big-ticket items. The chandeliers, the silver, the portraits. We've got the pre-auction gala tonight, and the developers from Atlanta are coming. They want to see the prestige, not a list of dusty books." He leaned in, his shadow looming over me. And make sure you look presentable. I need you there to answer technical questions if they arise. Just keep it brief. Don't go off on one of your history tangents. A gala. With people. Important, loud, wealthy people. The very idea made my stomach churn. Usually, I stayed in the back, hidden behind a display of antique quilts. But this time, the stakes were different. I had the truth in my bag, and I had no idea how to let it out. That night, the Beaumont Manor was transformed. Gas lamps flickered along the driveway, and the grand ballroom was filled with the clinking of champagne glasses and the low hum of expensive conversations. I wore a plain navy dress and stayed near the buffet table, trying to blend into the wallpaper. I watched as Big Al held court near the fireplace. He was pointing to a large map of the estate, gesturing wildly. "And here," he said, his voice booming, "is where the new Grand Savannah Plaza will begin. A modern marvel for a historic city." The man he was talking to was Marcus Thorne, the lead developer. Thorne looked like he was made of sharp angles and cold calculations. "And the title is clean?" Thorne asked, his eyes scanning the map. "Clean as a whistle." Al laughed, slapping Thorne on the back. The Beaumonts owned every inch of this dirt. No encumbrances, no disputes. "It's a clean slate, my friend." My hand tightened around my glass. A lie. A huge, profitable lie. I looked around the room. There were journalists there, city officials, and my neighbors. I knew I should walk over there. I should pull the journals out and show them the truth. But as I took a step forward, my legs felt like lead. My throat constricted. I could see the headlines in my mind, the stares, the questions. Who is this girl? Why is she interrupting? Suddenly, a voice spoke beside me. "You look like you're about to jump out of your skin, Evelyn." I jumped, nearly spilling my drink. It was Sarah, a young woman who worked at the local archives. We'd spoken a few times over the years, mostly in whispers in the quiet basement of the library. She was one of the few people who didn't call me Mouse. "Sarah," I gasped. It's a lot of people." "It's more than that," she said, looking at me closely. "You have that look you get when you find a rare first edition. What did you find in that house, Evelyn?" I looked at her, and for a second, the glass pane felt a little thinner. I led her to a quiet corner of the veranda, away from the noise. With shaking hands, I pulled one of the journals from my bag. "Read the entry from August 1874, I whispered. As Sarah read, her eyes widened. "Evelyn, this is the trust. The Oglethorpe Community Trust. It was never dissolved. This land, it belongs to the people living on it. This sale is illegal." "I know," I said, my voice trembling. "But Al, he's going to sell it tomorrow at the public auction. And I don't know how to stop him. I can't talk to them, Sarah. I can't stand up there." Sarah grabbed my arm. "Evelyn, listen to me. Big Al is a loudmouth, but you're the expert. You are the one who knows the truth. You don't have to be loud to be heard. You just have to be right." "I can't," I repeated, the old fear washing over me like a tide. "I'm just the cataloger." "No," Sarah said firmly. "Tomorrow, you're the witness. I'll help you. I'll bring the archival records to back this up. But you're the one who found it. You have to be the one to present it. At the auction. In front of everyone." I looked out at the dark trees of the estate. The auction was in 12 hours. The mouse was being asked to roar, and I was terrified that when I opened my mouth, no sound would come out at all. I didn't sleep a single wink. I spent the night in my small apartment, the journals spread out across my kitchen table like pieces of a bomb I was trying to defuse. I rehearsed what I would say. I wrote it down. I deleted it. I practiced in the mirror, but the woman looking back at me had eyes wide with terror and a voice that cracked after 3 words. How do you find your voice when you've spent 30 years perfecting your silence? The morning of the auction was hot and heavy, the kind of Georgia heat that makes everything feel slow and difficult. A massive tent had been set up on the lawn of the Beaumont Manor. Hundreds of people were there, investors in suits, locals in overalls, and the media with their flashing cameras. Big Al was in his element. He stood on the high wooden dais, his gavel in hand, sweating through his turquoise blazer. He was a master of the chant, that rhythmic, hypnotic speech auctioneers used to drive up prices. I have 5 million. Do I hear 6? 6 million for this historic jewel. 6 million to the gentleman in the front. Going once, going twice. I was standing in the wings, hidden by a heavy velvet curtain. My bag was heavy on my shoulder. Sarah was in the crowd. She gave me a small nod, holding a folder of her own. This was it. The land sale was the final item on the list. And now, the main event. Al shouted, his voice echoing through the speakers. The Beaumont land tract. 40 acres of prime development opportunity. We start the bidding at $10 million. The developers moved like sharks. 10 million. 12. 15. The numbers were astronomical. It was the sound of a neighborhood being sold for parts. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. Now, Evelyn. Do it now. I took a step out from behind the curtain. The bright sunlight hit me, and for a second, I was blinded. I walked toward the dais. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I wasn't walking, I was floating in a nightmare. Big Al saw me out of the corner of his eye. He didn't stop his chant, but his eyes narrowed. He waved a hand dismissively, motioning for me to get back. But I kept walking. I reached the podium. Al stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Hundreds of people stared at me. The cameras turned. Mouse? What are you doing? Al hissed, his microphone still on. The whole crowd heard it. A few people laughed. I reached for the microphone. My hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I looked at the crowd. All those eyes. The pressure felt like a physical weight on my chest. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Just a small, pathetic puff of air. Al sneered. The girls had too much sun. Get her off the stage. 2 of Al's assistants started toward me. I looked at Sarah. She was standing up, her face a mask of encouragement. I looked at the journals. Wait, I said. It was a whisper, but the microphone caught it. Wait, I said again, louder this time. My voice was shaky, but it was there. This sale, it cannot proceed. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Al grabbed my arm, his grip bruising. Shut up, Evelyn. You're fired. Get out of here. No, I said, pulling my arm away. I felt a sudden, sharp spark of anger. It was a new feeling, hot and bright. It burned through the fear. I am the appraiser of this estate, and I have found evidence that this land is not for sale. I pulled the journals from my bag and slammed them onto the podium. The sound was like a gunshot. These are the Beaumont land records from 1874, I said, my voice gaining strength with every word. I wasn't thinking about the people anymore. I was thinking about the history. I was thinking about the truth. They prove that this acreage was placed in a perpetual trust for the Oglethorpe community. It cannot be sold to a private developer. It cannot be destroyed. She's crazy, Al shouted to the crowd. Those are just old scrapbooks. They are legal documents. Sarah shouted from the crowd, holding up her own files. And the city archives confirm it. The trust is still active. The developers stood up. The city officials started whispering frantically. The mouse had just stopped a $20 million deal in its tracks. I stood there, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my heart still racing, but the glass pane was gone. I had shattered it. The tent was no longer a place of business. It was a beehive that had just been kicked. The noise was incredible. Reporters were shouting questions. The developers were huddled with their lawyers in a frantic circle, and Big Al was looming over me, his face a terrifying shade of purple. He looked like he wanted to wrap his hands around my throat, but with a dozen cameras pointed at us, he had to settle for a venomous whisper. You've ruined me, Evelyn, he hissed, the spit hitting my cheek. You think you're a hero? You're a thief and a liar. I'll make sure you never work in this state again. I'll see you for every penny you don't have. I stood my ground. My knees were still knocking together, and I felt like I might be sick at any moment, but I didn't back away. The truth isn't a lie, Al. You knew the title search was incomplete. You just didn't care. Suddenly, a man in a sharp gray suit stepped onto the dais. It was the city attorney, a man known for being as cold as a marble statue. He picked up one of the journals, adjusted his glasses, and read in silence for what felt like an eternity. The entire tent held its breath. "Mr. Higgins," the attorney said, addressing Big Al by his real name, "we are suspending this auction immediately. If these documents are what they appear to be, the city of Savannah has been party to a massive legal oversight. We need to verify these records at the courthouse." "This is ridiculous," Marcus Thorne, the developer, yelled from the front row. "We have a contract. We have permits." "Your permits are based on a faulty title, Mr. Thorne," the attorney replied calmly. "Until this is settled, not a single brick moves on this property." As the crowd began to disperse and the police arrived to secure the estate, Sarah fought her way through the throng to get to me. She grabbed my hands, and they were freezing. "You did it, Evelyn. You actually did it. Did you see Al's face? He looked like he'd swallowed a wasp." I couldn't even smile yet. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the reality of what I'd just done was crashing down on me. I had just publicly accused my boss of fraud. I had stopped a multi-million-dollar development. I was unemployed, and half the powerful people in the city probably hated my guts. "What now?" I whispered. "Now," Sarah said, "we go to the archives. We protect these books. And then we tell the neighborhood." We spent the rest of the day locked in the basement of the city library. Sarah called in every favor she had. We cross-referenced the journals with old property tax records and forgotten maps from the 1880s. The more we dug, the clearer it became. The Beaumonts had indeed set aside the land for the workers who had built their fortune. It was a perpetual gift, a legal term that meant it could never be revoked. By sunset, the story was leading the local news. They were calling it the Gnome in the Manor mystery, a play on my quiet nature. I hated the name, but I couldn't ignore the impact. People from the neighborhood, the one that was supposed to be demolished, started showing up at the library. They brought us coffee, sandwiches, and stories of their own. They told me about how their grandfathers had lived in those houses, about the community garden that had been there for 60 years. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just observing history, I was helping to save it. And as I spoke to these people, I realized something strange. My voice didn't shake as much. When I was talking about the land, about the facts, about the justice of the situation, the shyness seemed to take a back seat. I wasn't Evelyn the mouse, I was Evelyn the guardian. But the fight was far from over. Big Al wasn't going to go down without a fight, and Marcus Thorne had enough money to buy a dozen lawyers. That night, as I walked back to my car in the dimly lit parking lot, a black town car pulled up beside me. The window rolled down, and Thorne's cold eyes met mine. "Miss Miller," he said, his voice like silk over sandpaper. "Everyone has a price. You've made your point. You've had your moment of glory. Now, give me those journals, and I'll ensure you have a very comfortable life far away from Savannah. If you don't, well, history has a way of repeating itself. And history isn't kind to people who stand in the way of progress." I looked at him, and for a second, the old fear flared up. I wanted to run. I wanted to take the money and hide. But then I remembered the faces of the people who had brought me sandwiches that afternoon. I remembered the journals. "Progress isn't built on lies, Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice surprisingly firm. "And my price? You couldn't afford it." I walked away without looking back, my heart pounding, knowing that I had just turned a legal dispute into a personal war. The next week was a gauntlet. Big Al filed a lawsuit against me for theft of company property, claiming the journals belonged to his auction house. Marcus Thorne's legal team filed an injunction to have the journals seized and verified by their own experts. I was being followed by private investigators, and my phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from blocked numbers. But I wasn't alone anymore. Sarah had organized a legal defense fund through the community trust. A retired judge, a woman who looked like she was carved out of Georgia oak, took my case for free. I've spent 40 years watching men like Al Higgins and Marcus Thorne pave over our history, she told me. It's about time someone threw a wrench in the gears. The battleground shifted to the city hall. There was to be a public hearing to decide the fate of the Beaumont land tract. It was the final auction, in a sense. If the council voted to uphold the trust, the neighborhood was saved. If they voted with Thorne, the journals would be tied up in court for years while the bulldozers moved in. The morning of the hearing, the square in front of City Hall was packed. People were holding signs that said history over profit and trust the trust. When I arrived, the crowd parted for me. It was the most surreal moment of my life. I was still the same woman who got nervous ordering a pizza, but here I was, the face of a movement. Inside the chambers, the air was thick with tension. Big Al was there, looking uncharacteristically nervous. Marcus Thorne sat with a row of 6 lawyers, all of them looking ready to tear me apart. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the podium. I didn't bring a script this time. I brought the journals. I looked out at the council members, then at the crowd. I saw the families from the neighborhood. I saw Sarah. "Miss Miller," the mayor said, "you've made some serious allegations. You've halted a project that would have brought millions in tax revenue to this city. Can you prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that this trust is valid?" I opened the oldest journal. "History isn't just about dates and names, Mr. Mayor," I began. My voice was calm, resonant. The shyness was still there, a ghost in the back of my mind, but I didn't give it the microphone. It's about promises. In 1874, Elias Beaumont wrote these words, "Let this land be a sanctuary for those who labored when I could not. Let no man sell what belongs to the soul of the city." I spent the next hour laying out the evidence. I showed them the maps. I showed them the missing links in the chain of title that Big Al had tried to hide. I spoke about the architectural significance of the houses and the social fabric of the community. I wasn't just an appraiser anymore. I was a storyteller. I painted a picture of a Savannah that valued its people more than its parking lots. Thorne's lawyers tried to rattle me. They questioned my credentials. They accused me of being an embittered ex-employee. They tried to make me look like a disturbed, quiet girl who had found a hobby in old books. "You're just a cataloger, Miss Miller," one lawyer sneered. "What makes you think you understand the complexities of modern real estate law?" I looked him straight in the eye. "I understand that a signature on a deed doesn't expire just because it's inconvenient for your client. I understand that the law is supposed to protect the weak from the greedy. And I understand that you're the one who's confused because you're looking at a bank statement while I'm looking at the truth." The room erupted. The mayor had to pound his gavel for 5 minutes to get order. As the council retreated to deliberate, I sat on the wooden bench, exhausted. Big Al walked past me, his face pale. He didn't say a word. He knew. The mouse hadn't just roared, she had brought the whole house down. The council's decision came at midnight. By a vote of 5-2, the city of Savannah officially recognized the Oglethorpe Community Trust. The Beaumont land tract was saved. The roar that went up from the square outside was loud enough to shake the windows of City Hall. People were crying, hugging, and chanting my name. I stood on the stone steps, looking out at the sea of lights, and I felt a strange sense of peace. The quiet girl had found her voice, and in doing so, she had given a voice to an entire neighborhood. In the weeks that followed, my life changed in ways I never could have imagined. The charges against me were dropped. It's hard to sue someone for theft when the property they stole was used to prevent a massive citywide fraud. Big Al's Southern auctions went into receivership after the state started an investigation into his previous sales. Marcus Thorne moved his business to another state, chased out by the bad publicity. I didn't go back to being a cataloger in a dusty warehouse. Instead, the Community Trust hired me as their official historian and director of the new Beaumont Heritage Center, which was being established in the manor itself. My job was to ensure that the stories of the city were never buried again. I still get nervous in large groups. I still prefer the company of old books to loud parties. But the fear no longer paralyzes me. I realized that shyness isn't a wall. It's just a different way of moving through the world. You can be quiet and still be powerful. You can be soft-spoken and still be heard. One afternoon, a young girl came into the Heritage Center. She was about 10 years old, with her hair in messy braids and a notebook clutched to her chest. She was staring at a display of old photos, her eyes wide but her mouth tightly shut. She reminded me so much of myself that it hurt. "It's a lot to take in, isn't it?" I asked, walking over to her. She jumped slightly and looked at her shoes. She didn't say a word. "I used to be like that too," I said softly, sitting on the bench beside her. "I used to think that if I didn't say anything, I wouldn't make any mistakes. But then I realized that the biggest mistake you can make is keeping your light under a bowl." She looked up at me, a tiny spark of curiosity in her eyes. "Did you really stop the bulldozers?" she whispered. I smiled. "I didn't stop them. The truth did. I just had to find the courage to say it out loud." She nodded slowly and opened her notebook. She showed me a drawing she'd made of the manor, detailed and beautiful. "I want to tell stories too," she said. "Then you should," I replied. "And don't worry if your voice shakes at first. That just means what you're saying is important." As she walked away, I looked at the Beaumont journals, now displayed safely in a glass case. They were no longer hidden in a desk or at the bottom of a lunch bag. They were open for everyone to see. I walked to the large window of the manor and looked out at the neighborhood. I saw kids playing in the community garden, the laundry hanging on the lines, and the moss swaying in the Georgia breeze. It wasn't a premier development or a grand plaza. It was home. My name is Evelyn. I'm an appraiser, a historian, and a storyteller. And while I may still be the quietest person in the room, everyone knows exactly what I have to say. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is break the silence.